Okay, welcome back to members of 121 Community Church in Grapevine, Texas, and our ongoing study in Paul and the Faithfulness of God by N.T. Wright. We're going to look at our recall triad for pages 1195 to 1220, the teaching on the remnant of Israel. It's a very important lesson. We're going to take a look at the recall triad here. Let's begin with block 1. We're going to take a look at the concept of epibole. In Romans 11:15, we learn that Israel has temporarily fallen into blindness in order to open up ministry to the Gentiles. That's the way that Paul saw it. They are epibole, cast away, but they're cast away only temporarily because a remnant can still be grafted back in, says Paul. Because there is the universal concept of reconciliation, the karialege, reconciliation gathers Jews and Gentiles into one body of the called out ones in Christ. And we know that the metaphor of the olive tree is taken up by Paul in Romans 11:16 to 24 to speak to the spiritual remnant of Israel that will be saved in the Messiah. There will be a spiritual remnant called out of the Israel of the flesh that shall be saved by being in the Messiah. That takes us on to block 2. We're going to take a look at the magnified ministry of Paul. And Paul took on a twofold ministry, really. We know that he's always recognized as the apostle to the Gentiles, but he was also the apostle to the remnant of Israel. He felt very convicted to address the remnant of Israel. He believed that some of Israel would be saved. And he posited the sign of the Gentiles to provoke jealousy in the Israelites because that might prod them toward believing in Christ. Paul also posited the warring elements of the sark's flesh, warring against the new mind in the believer. As a former Pharisee, Paul was familiar with Jeremiah 11, which he elaborated on through the lens of Jesus Christ. Because the elongated exile that Jeremiah referenced, Paul saw as concluded in the advent of Jesus the Messiah. Now in block 3, we're going to take a look at that accepting back in concept, the prolempsis. The Israel that was temporarily cast away passes through Paul's magnified ministry in order to become a remnant that can be grafted back in. All because of the Kaioma Christou, the righteous act of Christ, secures reconciliation for the remnant of Israel. Israel can become the Lima Kata Eklogan. There is an elected remnant that shall be saved in the Messiah. Paul declares that this teaching on the remnant is a mystery in Christ. Paul declares this, the great mystery in Christ is that even though some branches are broken off, others shall be grafted in, and this is a great mystery of reconciliation in Christ, says Paul. So it's a very critical teaching and a way to really fully understand Paul's magnified ministry. He really did have a twofold ministry. He believed very deeply, convicted, he believed that a remnant of Israel would be saved. He did not turn away from Israel. He did enter the synagogue. Every time he entered a city, he went straight to the synagogue. He did preach to the Jews, hoping that a remnant would turn. But of course, he then ministered to the Gentiles if he was rejected by the Jews, but he did first address them in the synagogue. From here, let's take a look at our recall triad, our 4-point focus. It just gives us a good little snapshot of the lesson. I always like the fact that we have this 4-point focus now. So if you look at the 4-point focus, the key note is that the mysterion Christou, the mystery in Christ, for Paul, addressed both the temporary casting off of Israel and the grafting in of the Gentiles. And it includes the fact that Israel was temporarily blinded in order that salvation could be opened up to the Gentiles. Paul magnified his role of apostolic authority because he did seek to preach to Gentiles and to the remnant of Israel. Because, note 4, the remnant of Israel will be narrowed down out of the Israel of the flesh There will be an Israel of promise who will turn to the Messiah and gain salvation in the Messiah. There will be a accepting back in, or a prolempsis. There will be an accepting back in, or a grafting back in of the remnant. So you end up with that epibole, temporary casting away, and then the Kionian doxazo, magnified ministry of Paul, which brings into the covenant, new covenant renewal, the remnant of Israel as an accepting back in, a prolempsis. So we get great teaching again from Professor Wright, who really keys in on a critical area of Paul's ministry, an area that doesn't really get a lot of attention. We do always talk about his Gentile ministry, but he had a strong ministry to the remnant of Israel, a very strong concern and conviction for the remnant of Israel. After all, he saw himself there. He was greatly humbled by the grace that he received in Christ. He always called himself the least of the apostles, an unworthy apostle, because he knew his past. He knew the great forgiveness he had received, and he had a heart for the remnant of Israel. And not only the remnant of Israel, but he had a heart for those in the distant lands who had never even heard of the Messiah, or even any context for understanding Jesus as Messiah. And so he reached the further regions where Jesus had not even been known, and he preached there to fulfill his full ministry toward preaching the gospel. But he also entered every synagogue in every city and started by preaching to the Jews and teaching to the Jews. As a guest lecturer, as a guest speaker in the synagogue, he would begin with the Jewish audience. Of course, the Gentiles were on the perimeter around the synagogue. They were allowed to be there as God-fearers, and he would address the Gentiles also, but he always started in the synagogue. He always started in the synagogue because he had a heart of ministry for the remnant that would be saved in the Messiah, just as he himself was saved in the Messiah through the Damascus Road experience. So for a recall triad, we have epibole, casting away, the Kionian doxazo, magnified ministry, and prolempsis, grafting back in. Epibole, casting away temporarily, the Kionian doxazo, magnified ministry of Paul, and prolempsis, grafting back in of a remnant of Israel. All of that triad is abbreviated under the concept of mysterion Christou, the mystery of Christ. Paul says it's a great, great mystery I'm teaching here, and the particulars of it is that God, in his faithfulness and in his power and in his intentionality to bring forth his plan of salvation, will even use Israel's disobedience to his purpose. Even Israel's failure of vocation will be used by the Lord to bring about his plan of salvation in his Son. Paul says this is a great mystery, and he's conveying it as best he can by teaching these concepts to a variety of audiences. Wherever he went, he had to deal with the language issue and the understanding of terms and concepts. He always was doing the work of translation, translating ideas so his audience could understand, translating eschatology so that the remnant of Israel could be drawn out. He always was doing a work of translation to proclaim the gospel. That's going to wrap up a recall triad, a beautiful recall triad, and a beautiful lesson on the remnant of Israel that will be saved. There will be a remnant of Israel that will be saved. It was inaugurated by the Apostle Paul, who gave birth to Christian theology. He did not have a formal Christian theology or formal doctrines, but he did lay the foundation stones for the eventual emergence of Christian theology. He laid out the foundation stones. And that primarily means he laid out the terms, he laid out the ideas, he laid out the notions that would be used. Even the notions of the Trinity that would become a doctrine that he certainly didn't have as a formal doctrine of his own, but he certainly did put down the groundwork to really be the first proto-theologian in the Christian faith. So great teaching, again, by Professor Wright. This manuscript is so powerful. Every lesson is filled with great content. And again, in these pages, Professor Wright has given us great teaching on the remnant of Israel. That'll wrap up this lesson. We'll pick up next time on page 1221.